Okay, we are on chapter 7. I'm at home today. You might see my cat. Hopefully, she doesn't run across my computer screen and stop the video. But we're on chapter 7, the Royal Banquet. Right this way. Follow us. Come along. Step lively. Here we go. They shouted, hopping from the wagon and bounding up aboard a marble staircase. Milo and Talk followed very close behind. It was a strange-looking palace, and if he didn't know better, Milo would have said that it looked exactly like an enormous book. Standing on end with its front door and its lower part, in the lower part of the binding, just where the usual place the publisher's name is. It's like down here. Once inside, they hurried down a long hallway which glittered with crystal chandeliers and echoed with their footsteps. The walls and ceilings were covered with mirrors and reflections, whose reflections danced dizzily along with them. But the footman bowed coldly. "We must be terribly late," gasped the Earl nervously as they reached the tall doors of the banquet hall. It was a vast room, full of people loudly talking and arguing. The long table was carefully set with golden plates and linen napkins. An attendant stood behind each chair, and at its center, raised slightly above the others, was a throne covered in crimson cloth. Directly behind, on the wall, was the royal coat of arms, flanked by the flags of Dictionopolis. Milo noticed many of the people he had seen in the marketplace. Here, before we continue, I'll show you. This is the crest that they're talking about. The letterman was busy explaining to an interested group the history of the W, and off in the corner, the humbug and the spelling bee were arguing fiercely about nothing at all. Officer Shrift wandered through the crowd, suspiciously muttering, "Guilty, guilty, they're all guilty," and, on noticing Milo, brightened visibly and commented in passing, "Is it 6 million years already? My, how time flies." Everyone seemed quite grumpy about having to wait for lunch, and they were all relieved to see the tardy guests arrive. "Certainly glad you finally made it, old man," said the humbug, cordially pumping Milo's hand. "As the guest of honor, you must choose the menu, of course. Oh my, he thought, not knowing what to say. "Be quick about it," suggested the spelling bee. "I'm famished. Famished. As Milo tried to think, there was an ear-shattering blast of trumpets entirely off-key, and a page announced to the startled guest, "King Azaz, the Unabridged." The king strode through the door and over to the table and settled his great bulk into the throne, calling irritably, "Places, everyone, take your places." This is him. He was the largest man Milo had ever seen, with a great stomach, great piercing eyes, and a gray beard that reached to his waist, and a silver signet ring on the little finger of his left hand. He also wore a small crown and a robe with the letters of the alphabet beautifully embroidered all over it. "What have we here?" he said, staring down at Talk and Milo as everyone else took his place. "If you please," said Milo, "my name is Milo, and this is Talk. Thank you very much for inviting us to your beautiful banquet. I think your palace is beautiful." "Exquisite," corrected the Duke. "Lovely," consoled the minister. "Handsome," recommended the Count. "Pretty," hinted the Earl. "Charming," submitted the undersecretary. "Silence!" suggested the king. "Now, young man, what can you do to entertain us? Sing songs? Tell stories? Compose sonnets? Juggle plants? Do tumble tricks? Which is it?" "I can't do any of those things," admitted Milo. "What an ordinary little boy," commented the king. "Why, my cabinet members can do all sorts of things." "Oh, She wants to help me read. Hi, kitty. My cabinet members can do all sorts of things. The Duke here can make mountains out of molehills. The minister splits hairs. The Count makes hay while the sun shines. The Earl leaves no stone unturned. The Undersecretary, he finishes ominously, hangs by a thread. Can you do anything at all? Oh, kitty. No. Okay. She didn't pause it. That's good. I can count to 1,000, suggested Milo. Numbers! Never mention numbers here. We only use them when we absolutely have to, growled Adzaz disgustedly. Now, why don't you and Talk come up here and sit next to me, and we'll have some dinner. Are you ready with the menu? Reminded the humbug. Well, said Milo, remembering that his mother had always told him to eat lightly when he was a guest. Why don't we have a light meal? A light meal it shall be, roared the humbug, waving his arms. The waiters rushed to carry large serving platters and set them on the table in front of the king. When they lifted the covers, shafts of brilliant colored light leaped from the plates and bounced around the ceiling, the walls, across the floor, and out the windows. Not a very substantial meal, said the humbug, rubbing his eyes, but quite an attractive one. Perhaps you can suggest something a little more filling. The king clapped his hands, and the platters were removed, and without thinking, Milo quickly suggested, well, in that case, we ought to have a square meal of... A square meal it is, shouted the humbug again. The king clapped his hands, and once more the waiters reappeared, carrying plates, heaping high with steaming squares of all sizes and colors. Ugh, said the spelling bee, tasting one. These are awful. No one seemed to like them very much either, and the humbug got one caught in his throat and almost choked. Time for speeches, announced the king, as the plates were again removed and everyone looked glum. You first, he commanded, pointing to Milo. Your Majesty, lady and gentlemen, started Milo timidly. I would like to take this opportunity to say, in all the... That's quite enough, snapped the king. Mustn't take all day. But I'd just begun, objected Milo. Next, bellowed the king. Roast turkey, mashed potatoes, vanilla ice cream, recited the humbug, bouncing up and down quickly. What a strange speech, thought Milo, for he heard many in the past and knew they were supposed to be long and dull. Hamburgers, corn on the cob, chocolate pudding, pudding, said the spelling bee, in his turn. Frankfurt, sour pickles, strawberry jam, shouted Officer Shrift from his chair. Since he was taller sitting than standing, he didn't bother to get up. And so down the line it went, and with each guest rising briefly, making a short speech, then resuming his place. When everyone had finished, the king rose. Pâté fons gras soupe à la hommage fan sous clocher. Here, I'll let you read it. It's in French.